Hello, Lakeview family. I hope this Wednesday or whenever you're watching finds you doing well. I certainly am. These are good days. Looking forward to being together on Sunday. Had a wonderful time with Errol and Rhonda and Kimberly, Karam, hearing about hearing a report from them on how things are going in South Africa at the college and the work that God is doing. I especially appreciated the story of their security guard. I've heard that several times. I don't know, many of you probably don't know this, but I meet with Errol weekly, typically on Wednesdays from 8 to 10 on Zoom with Errol, another friend of mine, James Austin, who is a pastor in Camas at Camas Church of the Nazarene, and also Marcos LeBaron, who is a pastor, children's pastor at a church in the Nazarene Church in Arizona. And the four of us attended First Church together. James and Marcus were on staff with me when I was there at First Church. And Errol has been a significant part of our lives. And his conversation about the slow walk to freedom, which you've heard me reference as we're looking at these stories in the Old Testament, about God's work and the slow work of formation and transformation and redemption and restoration and the way in which God is working in the world. It's not expedient. It's not a microwave. It's a crock pot. It's slow work. And I think that's probably one of the things that I love the most about pastoring and more so than pastoring, just being a Jesus follower. I love that it's slow and that it takes time. A lot of you have heard me talk about this idea of the art of the long scope, and certainly something that I think of and try to practice often. And so I am just always taken by conversations I'm able to have and things I hear from Errol, because he embodies that so well, of just the slow work and radical obedience and trust, right? Recognizing that is exactly where God has called them to be. And it is so difficult, but the optimism and the hope that they carry because of who they know God to be. And again, that is the point. As we journey through the Old Testament and these passages, as we started with creation and looked at the fall and the consequences of that in Genesis 4 through 11, the reality of sin and human depravity and what that means. But then knowing what God does through the journey he takes with people. And most importantly, in these stories, what we learn about God. God is the primary character in all of these stories. And Scripture is God's story. It is, right, the meta-narrative, this grand narrative of God's work in the world. And we would do well to recognize that. Now we're going to read about people, and today, or this Sunday, right, I'm kind of smashing together two stories. We've referenced the birth announcement. We had a funny little kids moment with Dawn and Betty Irwin, and as the kind of elder in the congregation, talking about them hearing that they're going to have a baby, and as a way of talking about and kind of giving a picture of the announcement as it would have been received by Abraham and Sarah, and kind of the laughter. So we're going to touch on that a little bit more in the context of what we're understanding and learning about God, and the reference specifically, when they laugh, when Sarah laughs. And I love the text because she says to the messengers who are there, like, "Oh, I wasn't laughing," and just simply in one of the translations I was reading, "No, you laughed." And just like very direct, like, "No, you laughed. Don't try to deny it. Like, you laughed." And it wasn't laughing like it's funny. I think it's more of a laughter like it's so ludicrous because it's painful. And something that I don't understand, that we'll see in both of these, that I can't grasp as a man, right, is I don't grasp the depth of barrenness and what that means. And I'm trying to be more sensitive the more I read Scripture and the more we read stories, because again, we want to find ways in which we relate to and can understand and empathize with these stories, both with ourselves and also helping others do so. And I know that as we read this passage and talk about it on Sunday, there will be individuals who the idea or the story of barrenness or difficulty in having children or taking a long time, it not just being like it often is for people, that's hard for individuals. It's hard for families. It's hard for people to process. And so I want to be sensitive to that. I want to give that space. And I want us to think about and hold in tension Sarah's laughter with that reality. Like imagine, right? You're 90 and you're a woman and you have not yet been able to bear a child. That's painful. That's hard. That's difficult. You can't provide an heir for your husband, right? All these things that in that culture were so important. I want us to think about that. Equally as important, when we get to the Hagar and Ishmael story, one commentator I talked called it an eviction. And I was like, in the same way of like, I don't know how to understand the fullness and the depth of the pain and hurt that barrenness brings to some people. It's the same with the word eviction. I've never been evicted. I've never had difficulty in housing. I've never been housing insecure. Melissa and I are landlords, and luckily to this point we haven't had to evict anyone. But recognizing that being forced out is a reality for people. And it's becoming more of a reality in our cultural context. Housing instability is incredibly difficult. Pastor Gretchen is working with and working with the Region 3 Housing Coalition on a lot of projects, hosting a homeless panel. Last month, there was 23 individuals who have some experience in homelessness or housing insecurity in recent history. That's how you qualify for this specific meeting. It's real. So again, when we're talking about this story, that is something that some of us are going to feel more deeply than others, whether it's our own experience or people that we have journeyed with. Being evicted or not having a place, not having a home, being kicked out, being marginalized, being ostracized for no other reason than you were essentially taken advantage of to achieve an end because of a lack of faith and trust from people. And this is what happened. This was the mess that was created. Hagar had zero control in that situation. So it's just interesting, and I hope we can read it that way. But in all of these things, there are things that we learn about God. And again, God has his chosen people, so he promises Abraham that his descendants, the line, will come through Isaac. But at the same time, God says, I see Ishmael. That's what his name means. God hears Ishmael cry in the desert. He provides the water from the well and promises Abraham that he will also bless Ishmael and he will have descendants through Ishmael. It's crazy. And so another commentator I read talked about how, so there's a covenant that God makes with Abraham and his descendants are coming through Jacob. But what supersedes that is God's promise of descendants. And the promise was given before the covenant. So the promise is still fulfilled through Ishmael as well as Isaac. Now the covenant is with the people of Israel. And there's certain things about being called out, and that brings all sorts of stickiness with what it means to be the elect and the chosen people. And with that chosenness comes heavy responsibility, but it's also the reality of God's promise of provision. So there's so many fun things to unpack on Sunday, and I'm excited for that. So this video was a little longer than most, but as you can tell, I just get excited about the Bible and these stories and what it means for us when we learn about God. So I'll see you on Sunday, and I look forward to our time together as always. Blessings.